Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another interview. I am JB, and joining me as the guest who I'll be interviewing today is Mr. Craig DeLeon. Thank you so much for joining.
Hey, thanks, JB. Thanks for having me. Appreciate
So
it.
I'm really excited to have you here today. Of course, people watching this will know you as the composer of the recently released Velma show, but you've got quite a long career before that where you've worked on several notable projects. But going back to the beginning, according to IMDb at least, your career started in 2006. But before that point, what began your journey to get into music and composing?
Sure. I I'd always been a musician. I played in bands in high school. Um, I used to just make beats in my bedroom and stuff like that. But once I hit college, I fell in love with film and majored in that and wound up studying that. And once I left college, I started working at a production company called Propaganda Films that was a 90s, 80s, 90s production company that was the home of music video and commercial directors like David Fincher, Michael Bay, Antoine Fuqua, Michel Gondry, Spike Jonze, a ton of people. And I became Spike Jonze's assistant. I was his first assistant, and it was my first job. And my goals at the time were to break into the business and sort of pursue, maybe being a music video director. But through working with him and in that environment, I kind of realized that I could figure out a way to combine my passion with music and my passion with film, cinematic storytelling together, and it kind of coincided with kind of the change in film composing away from the sort of John Williams type of, conservatory trained composer to, people who were more proficient with maybe electronics or, came from a band background. And, probably the most famous would be Hans Zimmer in terms of that. But, um, it felt like, oh, you can be somebody who's self-taught and who's kind of coming from uh like a popular or rock music background and get into film composing. And it was through working with those kind of groundbreaking directors where I saw that you could do that. Some of these guys were working with like the Dust Brothers as film composers. And then obviously eventually Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and Spike worked with Arcade Fire, and Karen O on scores and things like that. So I started to see like, oh, maybe after Spike, maybe this is something I can sort of figure out. And eventually I made my way back to New York to focus on trying to break in as an ad music composer. And at the time, New York was more of like the hub of advertising. So moved back to New York and then started working with this company called Human, uh, who are like a premier ad music house. And I started working with them as a composer. And that was basically my life pretty full on until around 2008 or nine. I had done a short film that was nominated for an Oscar. And I started to try to take meetings to get more long form stuff. But folks were kind of saying, oh, well, you live in New York, it's kind of best if you live out here. So I moved back to LA in 2010 and then continued doing spots with Human, ads with Human, but started to break in doing more longer form stuff. So I had a couple of credits here and there, like in 2006 and 2000, I think, seven and around there. But it really didn't start taking hold until I would say around maybe 2014. And then kind of, I think my biggest break was the Sia movie, the movie that Sia did called Music, that she directed and wrote the script, and starred Kate Hudson. And that was like right before the pandemic. And then everything started to kind of take off.
So I love how like the amount of names that you've mentioned there that no doubt a lot of people watching this will be familiar with, and I love how music has a way of reaching out to whoever will listen to it and will, reveal stuff about themselves. So for instance, my mum used to listen to loads of Charlie Parker jazz, when I was growing up, so that inspired me to take up playing the saxophone and all of that. So in terms of your journey becoming a composer, was there a specific movie or maybe even another composer that you were aware before that point that you feel maybe inspired you or influenced you?
Well, when I was a kid, I was really, and still am, I was obsessed with Prince. I loved Prince, like I kind of became, I hit like 13, 12, 13, right around when MTV came out. And just honestly, it was like, it was music. I always loved music. My father played music like religiously in my household, everything from Bob Marley to Frank Sinatra to, Elton John. Like I grew up not thinking that there was any genres of music. I thought everything was just the same. But in terms of me being a player, it was watching music videos and seeing like people, even though they were miming, seeing them playing instruments in that fun, you know, exciting setting. I think as a child that it was a visual thing that kind of drew me in. It was like the idea of having this gear and playing on stage and stuff like that. And then just diving in, I just got more and more interested in actually making music and playing music. But I was more interested in making records. I liked the technology. I loved 4 tracks. I loved drum machines. I loved synths, and I loved making my own little tapes in my bedroom. And so people like Prince, Trent Reznor, Todd Rundgren, Stevie Wonder, uh, producers like Brian Wilson. These folks were the ones that those were like my heroes, people that knew how to make like whole records, songs, records. I wasn't so much into playing instruments. I was more into like, I want to make something that I could put on my stereo that I made and listen to it. So that was my first thing. Around like at the same time, I grew up at a time where John Williams was like the hero to everybody. Um, so in terms of film composing, he was on my radar, but then I really fell in love with Hans Zimmer. And then after that, I became sort of fixated on people who I thought were like a little bit left of center. And I would say the best example of that would be Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and maybe also Cliff Martinez was a big inspiration to me. Yeah, I mean, I could go on. There's probably 100 names I could throw, but like those symbolize like the kind of composer I wanted to be. Somebody who would play with like texture and sound and minimalism and um, like concepts. To me, somebody like Hans is brilliant at like a concept. And whether it's a big sound or a small sound, it's a very simple, concise concept that he'll approach a score with. And that I love that. That's my big inspiration.
As you say, there's just so many names to pick from when it comes to film composers and all of that, which is such an incredible thing considering the amount of scope that you can get with that. But it's also it highlights that it's quite a competitive market to get into. And so with a lot of our audience being, aspiring to be, to follow in the footsteps of whoever we have interviewing, what would your advice be to people that are watching this that aspire to do what you're doing?
I think the main bit of advice is to not take no for an answer from anybody. If you have a passion for it, and you are putting in the work to figure out how to get to be in this seat, there's going to be enough obstacles in your way to get into this seat. Don't let people saying no be one of those, because that's external. There's enough internal things that are going to be in your way that you're going to have to beat in order to get here, which is doubt, skill level, like learning, literally just learning what it is. So these are all challenging things. Learning how to make music, learning how to score to picture, learning how, these are all going to be there that you're going to have to deal with. But having somebody tell you, no, you can't do it, or no, we're not interested, don't let that be one of them, because you just got to keep going. I've been at this for a very long time, and there have been a lot of times where I was just like, maybe it's not going to work out for me. But I didn't stop. And honestly, figuring out another way to make music for a living was not any advice anybody ever gave me, but I think in hindsight is advice I would pass along to anybody else. Like, I did music for ads for 15 years, everything from Coca-Cola to Apple to like Huggies to Tampax, it doesn't matter. I got to write music every day, 5 days a week for 15 years. And that made me fast. It made me decisive. It made me skilled at multiple types of genres. I built up a library of music that I was then able to show to studios and directors. If they said, hey, can you do something in an Ennio Morricone style? Sure. And I had a big folder of tracks that I had to do Ennio Morricone sounding jingles for various jobs over 15 years. I was then able to show that. Or can you do something in an orchestral style? Sure. So you don't have to be doing that in ad music to be able to show people what you can do. What you can do is you could just take some time every day and you can make a job for yourself. You could say, today I'm going to write, this week I'm only going to write orchestral music, and spend a week writing orchestral music every day, and then just put it in a folder. And then next week I'm going to do, electronic music, and then just do that all week. And then by the time at the end of a year, if you look at all the folders that you have, you'll have a bunch of music that you can then show when somebody comes your way saying, hey, I'm thinking about hiring you for something, but I want to see if you could do this particular genre. Do you have anything in this genre to show me? Some of the first jobs that I got as a result of not really my ad music. One summer it was slow in the ad world. There was nothing really happening on a daily basis. And I made a project for myself. Every day I was going to write music in the style of Mr. Robot. And I did that for a month. And at maybe about 6 months later, somebody called me for a potential job, and they said, hey, do you have anything that sounds sort of like Mr. Robot or Social Network? And I directed them to my SoundCloud page, and I got the job. So the music that actually got me the project was the result of me giving myself an assignment and having the time to do it, and things like that, and executing it. So I think it's just kind of figuring out what's out there in the world that people are hiring people to do, and maybe putting yourself into that same bucket. If Sonlux sounding scores become the hot thing because of Everything Everywhere All at Once, try to do something that's your take on that sound, because that is kind of how the business goes. Like, people do kind of say, like, well, we're going to do something that sounds like that, or we're going to do a movie that's influenced by that. Let's look for that kind of composer. It's kind of the way it is.
Yeah, I love that, because that really spoke to your resume in general, because I love the composition and the tracks that were featured in Velma, and so it really impressed me when I went to your IMDb, and a lot of it was different types of live action projects, which is a different format to animation, of course. So does your methodology at all change when going into an animated feature versus live action?
No, because well, I should say Velma's inspirations were not really animation based, to be honest with you. They were, at least the way it was sort of pitched to me when I was demoing to get the job, it was, this is kind of inspired by Riverdale. It's kind of inspired by Stranger Things. It's kind of inspired by the X-Files. You know, the references were all like live action. Because I think the format of the show is sort of like a self-referential adult show that happens to take an animated, you know, IP and sort of reinvent it through that lens. It wasn't sort of taking, you know, Riverdale was like maybe the opposite. It was like taking a comic book and turning it into a live action thing. So they adultified it, you know, with the look and the sound of it. This was sort of like, we're taking a cartoon, we're keeping it as a cartoon, but we're infusing sort of this referential, you know, 2020s kind of, you know, take on looking at material that we all know and love and sort of putting a different spin on it. So we treated it like an adult project, you know. So I don't know if I was doing sort of a straight up, you know, like Pixar or Warner Brothers or DreamWorks animated feature, if I would have that same kind of, you know, it would all depend on what the filmmakers wanted from me, frankly.
It's fascinating to me how you mentioned how it was pitched and the different styles that they were going for when it came to the musical score that they wanted to use. And so, to that end, when you were giving your demos to be involved with the project, at what stage in the show's development was that? Like, do you know if they've had anything written at that point, or was it in the early days of it?
Yeah, they did. They had they gave me a couple of scenes that later, once I got the job, I realized that one of the scenes they gave me was in episode 1. One of the scenes they gave me was in episode 3. One was in episode 1 also, I think. I can't remember. So they were animated. They weren't finished animating, but they were already animated and voiced. Yeah. So they were pretty far along, like when they were looking for composers. But it was still an ongoing thing, you know. Animation starts quite early. I'm sure they'd probably been working on it for a year already at that point.
And so,
but then once I got hired, episodes came very regularly for me to score, and I would say like clockwork, every 2 weeks a new episode would show up. Yeah.
And so at that point, before getting hired on, or just as you were getting hired on, how familiar were you with the Scooby Doo franchise in general? And were you required to refer back to them at all, or was it very much embedded within Riverdale, and stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, I grew up watching Scooby Doo and knew all about the show. I also kind of grew up, I'm probably around the same age as, maybe I'm older than Mindy Kaling, and Charlie, Grandy, who was the showrunner. So I think we are also part of a generation of sort of recognizing like a lot of, I think at a certain point, maybe Scooby Doo began to be like lampooned maybe a little bit, like things were made fun of about the show that became also part of the culture, like you meddling kids, and like let's split up, and like it's always Scooby and Shaggy and it's always the three other good looking ones together, like things became a part of the culture that were less serious than they're solving a mystery, so it became sort of ironic. So I had the sensibility that Scooby was like an ironic thing, and it was like a beloved childhood real mystery show, So both of those influences are part of like my understanding of the show naturally anyway. So between that and their direction, it was sort of natural to come up with the sound of the show.
An interesting part about the whole Velma show that we knew about in the very early days was that Mindy Kaling was going to be voicing Velma, but also making Velma, appear more Indian, which was something that I was really excited to see. Of course, with my own background, it was interesting to see what direction that would take. And, going through your IMDb, I was really excited to see that you were involved with the project, Sydney, which of course was highlighting the life and career of the great and late Sydney Poitier. So I was wondering, to your point of view, how important is it for people of different backgrounds to see themselves represented in film and television?
It's like 100% crucial. It's 100% like what it is that I want to be involved in professionally and how I want to be perceived and what I want to see on screen and behind the scenes. Like um when I went to college in the early 90s, it was around the time that Spike Lee was busting out on the scene and John Singleton, and there was this wave of black film that was sort of part of the culture. And to me, I always felt like as excited as I was about that sort of development and to be like growing up and getting ready to be an adult entering into a business that was expanding that way, I thought that real breakthrough would be if you could have people of color and there would be no real reference to them being a person of color in a role. So like my example that I used to use when I was 19, 20 years old in film school was I want to see a movie where Luke Skywalker is black and nobody's talking about him being black and he's not stereotypical in any way, but it's just the hero of the movie just happens to be a person of color. That to me was true breakthrough. And honestly, Mindy's representation of Velma basically being that thing that I envisioned in 1990 as a real breakthrough is happening now. And it's not really it's not a topic of discussion on every episode of Velma that Mindy is you know, South Asian. It just happens to be so. And there's a show out right now on Netflix called Beef, where all of the characters are East Asian. And, from Japanese to Vietnamese to Korean to Chinese. And it's not a show about that. It's just the characters are that. And I feel the most passionate about that kind of representation more than anything else. I think everything is important. I think stories that are stories about the culture of the people represented are important, obviously. But I also think it's important when a wider audience can just see a character of another culture portrayed as the lead without it being a story about that person's culture. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And it speaks to some of the trepidation that I went into it with, because on one hand, I was excited in terms of, oh, so maybe we're going to see, some exploration of South, Asian culture. Like for me, I know that a lot of that culture is having really strict parents that were like, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer. And I was like, okay,
Right.
maybe this will explain why Velma is the need to be the one that solves everything. And then when it wasn't about that, it was a bit like whiplash. It kind of threw me for a loop a bit. But when you've explained it like that, it does start to make more sense from that angle.
Yeah, it's I don't know if I can really articulate it well, but I think when my experience is if the stories are very much about exploring the culture from like a large monolithic point of view, the first thing it does is it makes everybody, even if you're part of the culture, it makes you feel like we're all the same. And I don't think that that's fair. Like it's interesting that you were thrown whiplash style, like when you saw that it wasn't
Yeah.
exploring these experiences that you've had as a South Asian. But, you know, maybe not exploring those things becomes more exclusive to other South Asians that didn't necessarily have that experience that you had with strict parents and you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer. It may be sometimes cliches are cliches because they're pretty prevalent, but wouldn't it be also nice to not explore the cliches and then allow people that might be feeling maybe a little insecure that they're South Asian, but they didn't have that experience? Am I not really South Asian because I didn't have strict parents who wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer? Am I not really Black because I didn't have, the experience with I'm actually West Indian American. My parents are from Jamaica. So, should a story about my family talk about the fact that there are many things about Jamaican culture that my family didn't embrace that are part of like the cliches of the wider understanding of like Jamaican culture? So I just think it allows more people to be brought in rather than only the people that had those experiences brought in. So I think there's room for both. I mean, I think there's a total show with a South Asian character, a South Asian Velma, who in her household has all of these sort of cultural things that she had that maybe she's modeling when she goes and becomes like a detective. Maybe that's actually very interesting. But there's room for the one that was made too, where that wasn't. Maybe that's not part of Mindy's culture at home. I don't know. But
yeah, definitely. Even the fact that she's over in America and I'm in the UK, even that alone, that difference could mean night and day in many cases.
It could be, yeah. Like I know West Indians in England have a very different experience than West Indians in America, but yet they both come from the same place. One just went here and the other went there, and then the cultures of those two countries that they landed in help shape their experience as immigrants, So it's all super interesting to me. And I'm proud of being part of a show like Velma, where it's created by a person of color, it's voiced by a person of color, and its lead is a woman person of color as well. Like that, I think it's all great,
Of course, issues around all of that aside, one thing that is pretty much undisputed online was that people love the music in the show, love the composition. And my favorite is the end credit sequence, where it kind of ramps up and it makes it like it's epic, but it also does have the essence of mystery behind it. Do you remember what it was like to work on that, or if you have any other tracks that you used in the show that stood out to you as being particularly memorable?
That one is really good, and that thank you for saying that. It was my second attempt actually at doing that, a track to fill that slot. And I don't totally remember the first version I did, which was wildly different, but it was still trying to be. It might have been a little bit goofier, and I think maybe the note was like, let's really embrace that this is like, we're adults making an adult show that happens to be this like cartoon from our childhoods. And then I think I thought of, I know, the first version I did was very X-Filesy. And it was a little low energy. So we wanted you at the end of every episode to basically be like excited to watch the next episode. And I think the version I did at first was a little bit more mysterious and not as exciting. So maybe what I did was I took the adult note too far. And then for the second pass, which is the one that's on it now, I just was like, let's make it wild and fun,
Yeah, and it is amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't even know people were talking about the music online.
No, genuinely, that last scene, that I don't want to attempt to sing it, but it was just so high energy. I really wish that you could like get it on like iTunes or Spotify. That would be
Maybe I'm surprised because two of my projects have soundtracks. This one didn't approach me about putting a soundtrack together, but maybe if there's a season 2, there will be one. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know like a lot of media outlets have kind of jumped on there being a season 2, maybe even ramblings of another 10 episodes coming at some point this year. I mean, is that something that you would be interested in at all?
Yeah. Yeah, I love working on the show. Everybody's great. Like, we were a great team. Um, it's honestly, it's like one of the smoothest productions that I've worked on. I have a great team of people that helped me do it. Adam Ruedas Del Rio, who's a brilliant composer, did a lot of additional music for me. And Todd Dahlhoff is my music editor, and he mixed it. So we work really well together. And then our team and the production team, post-production team, worked really well together, and the showrunner, and I loved it. It was like for 6 months, it was great fun to look forward to all of our spotting sessions that we did online, and the note sessions that we did on Zoom and stuff like that. They were always they loved everything we did. Their notes were sometimes pretty minor. It was fun. I really do hope it goes season 2.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what direction everything takes. And I guess getting into the process now of wrapping things up, I want to ask, is there any upcoming or future projects that you're working on that you can share and talk about today at all?
Yeah, the main thing I could talk about is Fatal Attraction. So I'm doing the TV reboot of Fatal Attraction, starring Joshua Jackson and Lizzie Kaplan, and that's going to be on Paramount Plus. It drops April 30th, and that's 10 episodes. We're really, 8 episodes. We're super excited about it. It's produced by Amblin, and apparently Mr. Spielberg loves the series and was watching all the cuts and hearing the music and stuff like that. So that's a dream of mine to have been exposed to him that way. But the show is amazing, and I can't wait for everybody to see that. And there will be a soundtrack coming out shortly.
And is there an ideal place for people watching to keep up with your work and all the future things that you're going to be involved in?
I'm trying to get my website together. It's a little slow going because I really haven't had a moment to breathe. But what I would suggest is just checking out IMDb if you want to see stuff that I'm up to. And what I will do is on IMDb, once my website is ready, I'll have a link to that. And then there'll be a link there to hear new music from me and find out about, projects that I'm working on, etc.
Well, thank you so much. That does wrap up all the questions that I have for you today. I did just
Thanks.
want to give you an additional thank you for coming on today and for all the time that you've given me, because when I reached out to a lot of the people that worked on Velma, of course, because of the loud discord about the show online, a lot of people that were working on it were kind of like, I don't want any part of this discussion. Like, it's a bit, almost too hot to handle, too cold to hold, in a way. So I do really appreciate the fact that you came on today and you spoke about it openly. So thank you so much for that.
Sure, I'm proud of it. Obviously I'm aware of all that discourse, and that's okay. It's a big world. Everybody can talk. Everybody can be heard. I'm proud of my work as a composer, and I'm proud of the show, and I'm proud to be a part of it. And I have no problem talking about it. So thank you.
That is absolutely amazing. So, massive thank you, massive respect. And I guess another thing that I want to thank is the people watching this today who have continued to stay with this series and to support all of this. So thank you so much to you for watching. If you want to see everything, our link tree is in the description down below. And for more interviews, please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.